G'day, IB psychologist. You know what they say, to err is human, to forgive is divine. I have a confession to make and I have an apology to make. Everyone who bought the IB Psychology flashcards, it just recently came to my attention that there's a glaring error in one of the cards. I don't know how it happened, but I do take full responsibility for it. If you've brought your flashcards, take a look at the case studies flashcard. Now on the reverse, it says the definition of a natural experiment. It talks about independent, dependent variables, them being naturally occurring. That's not the right definition. The case study definition should be like this. All right, so if you do have your flashcards, if you bought one of the first 1,000 sets that we make, then you might want to take your pen and jot down the notes. Now, I'll just hasten to add that actually that definition is really for paper 3. Paper 3 has been cancelled for this year for the May 2021 exams and for the May 2022 exam. So this error might not be too bad, and we'll definitely get it fixed for the next round that we print and ship out. And that's exactly why we run very small print runs. We only ever do about 1,000 books or flashcards in one time, so anything like this we can change and fix. But anyway, there's no excuse. I'm very, very sorry for it. To make up for that, I've just emailed everyone who has bought the flashcards. I wrote an example essay on case studies with on the brain and behavior. So you've got that with examiner comments and what I would mark that essay. So you've got that. If you've got the flashcards already with that mistake, you have that example essay in your email, and I'll send you the printable digital version of the correct flashcard. It was right in the version before we sent it to the printer, and then I made a couple of edits. I have no idea how it happened. It just got the completely wrong definition went to the printer. So I've sent you and emailed you the correct definition. Anyone who buys the flashcards from today, in the additional support files, you will get the correct version as digital, right? Unfortunately, we can't change the printed version. It's still there in this first 1,000 copies, but you'll get the correct version in digital format, and you'll get the example essay. And I'm making this video explaining case studies as well as another way to get more information out there to IB Psychology students to help you with your exams, and to say, again, I'm incredibly sorry. Now, so what is a case study? The definition should be, a case study is an in-depth investigation of an individual, small group, or an organization. Now, what makes it in-depth? The fact that they use a range of different methods. A case study will use a combination of tests, surveys, questionnaires, observations, interviews, and they use all of those methods to gather their data. Two really good examples, and these are the two examples I used in the example essay I just wrote and sent out, are SM and HM. SM is the study where this woman has natural damage occurring in her amygdala, and as a result, she doesn't have any sense of fear. So they took her to an exotic pet store, they showed her scary movies, and they took her to a haunted house. No fear response whatsoever, even in her real life. So they used other methods. That was observations they used to gather that data. In other methods, they gave her questionnaires, they interviewed her about her life. She's been in abusive relationships. I think she was held up at knife point one time. She lives in a dangerous environment, but she still sort of goes home by those same routes. So she doesn't, even in her real life, she doesn't have a healthy fear response. This is a really valuable case study because it demonstrates the role of the amygdala in feeling fear. HM's classic case study, you've probably studied this. He had epilepsy, his hippocampus was removed. No one really knew. This was in the 1950s. No one really knew what the hippocampus did. And as a result, he had no short-term memory. And so this was one of the first studies that really provided insight into the possible role of the hippocampus in transferring short-term memory to new long-term memory. So HM, as a result of the operation, he could no longer create any new memories. So he was kind of forever living in the present. Both of these case studies, they demonstrate the value of case studies because they show us localization of function. We can learn about the amygdala and the hippocampus. They take people with unique brain damage and they conduct a range of different methods to gather this data. Now, we can do the same thing on animals, but the problem with animals, like we can damage their hippocampus or we can damage their amygdala and watch what happens. And this is what psychologists do a lot of the time. But the problem is, animals can't tell us about their experiences. We can test memory on animals by watching them go through a maze or looking at their behavior for memory, but they can't verbalize their memory. We can't give them verbal memory tests. So studying memory on animals is quite limited to anything we can just see, right? They don't get to verbalize their experience, and the same thing with SM and fear. Right? They can't verbalize their experiences to us. Plus, they're animals. Can these generalize to humans? And so human case studies are valuable in this way. Now, we could try to take some humans and damage their brains experimentally, but ethically, that's pretty bad. And also, who would volunteer for that study, right? No one would. So we see here the value of case studies. But they're not without their limitations. Now, this is all explained in the example essay that I've sent out, but I'll just go over it now. These studies on localization are not without their issues. For example, anonymity. Like we can see here, HM has since passed away, so we know his real name was Henry Molaison. But when he was alive, researchers can't publish his full name. SM, we don't know her full name, we don't know who she is. They have to protect their anonymity because, well, they don't want to become like, you know, freak shows, right? Imagine all the media attention you would get if you were the woman without fear or the man without memory. But anonymity comes at a bit of a cost. What if other researchers want to replicate these findings? What if they want to study these participants, right? And so, you know, SM has damage in her amygdala, which is very rare to find someone with just damage to the amygdala because it's deep within the brain. Very easy to find people with damage to the cortex because it's closer to the surface, right? Easier to get damaged. Now, what's the ethical responsibility here for the researchers? Should they provide SM's details to other researchers who want to study her? Or do they need to protect her privacy? Now, it's a little bit of a tricky one, right? Now, with SM, you probably think, well, actually, okay, that's an easy one because they can just ask SM, hey, would you like to be part of another study, right? And they can liaise with her. Not too much of a big deal, but HM is a little bit tricky because he can't remember giving his consent. He can't remember giving his permission, right? And then so I even believe that the researchers here were a little, I mean, lots of researchers studied HM throughout his life. So obviously they gave his details to some people, but did they select who they did and who they did give his details to and who they didn't? And some people have accused the researchers of HM, the Brendan Milner, of sort of protecting his identity, his details for their own fame, right? Because he, you know, a lot of psychologists want to become famous, right? They want to become the next Milgram or the next Zimbabwe, and if they see HM as a gateway to fame, well then, you know, they want to keep hold of that. And so where's the ethical responsibility there? So that's one issue with case studies. Another issue, invariably, especially when we look at studies on localization of function, is generalizability. Now, a lot of students make the mistake of saying case studies lack generalizability because they're only on one person or a small sample, full stop, boom, mic drop. Like, that's my critical thinking. You have to go further. Why might these results not be generalizable from these unique samples? What's different about these individuals that might limit the extent to which we would expect the results in a different sample? Well, think of SM, for example. Her amygdala damage was caused by genetics. Now, perhaps it's not just the amygdala that's responsible here for her lack of fear response. Maybe that same genetic condition is having an influence. Now, the chance of that is slim, but it's a possibility, right? For HM, he had epilepsy. He had the epilepsy, that's why he had the surgery. Maybe it's the epilepsy that was also affecting his memory. I'm not saying entirely, like, of course the hippocampus had a role, we know that now definitively, but you know, people with epilepsy do have memory problems, so that's not beyond the realm of belief. Now, this is highlighting, these are a couple of really important doubts here about these studies. They don't throw away the findings altogether, but they cast doubt. Now, case studies are only really valuable when we add them to the body of evidence that exists in other animal studies and, say, fMRI technology studies where we can look at people's activity in the brain when they perform different tasks. So by themselves, yeah, they can provide us tentative conclusions, but they are quite limited when we use just that case study. We have to combine them with other research on animal studies and other research on say quasi-experiments or using fMRI studies on healthy participants to get the full picture and to really have stronger conclusions about the role of, for example, the amygdala in fear and the hippocampus in localization of function. All right, so that's I would hope, right, if I was to write this essay in an exam, they give me pretty good marks, what I'm showing there. And what you need to show, right, is that you know what the research method is, how it's used to study a particular topic, in this case the brain and behavior, and why. Then in an essay go further and then look at the limitations, and I've explained two there, I think, in pretty good detail. I recommend that structure for answering about research methods, what, how, why, right, and use these studies to support your opinion, to support your argument. Okay, I hope that was helpful. Again, you know, rest assured, when we make these resources, they go through two sets of copy editing, once the draft before it gets designed, and then after the design, it goes through a second round of copy editing. Mistakes happen, I'm very sorry. All I can do is do better next time, and I promise I'll keep making resources to help you study for IB psychology, or you teach IB psychology if you're a teacher. Thank you very much. Cheers.